Welcome to the Optimal Bio podcast. At Optimal Bio, we don't just balance your hormones, we balance your whole body. Our conversations range from nutrition to medicine with an emphasis on wellness tips to support your health journey. If you like what you hear, find us on the web at optimalbio.com and follow the podcast so you don't miss an episode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Optimal Bio Podcast. Today, as always, we're honored to have Dr. Brannon, founder of Optimal Bio, and we're going to talk about osteoporosis today. So, Greg, for the ill-informed or folks that want to learn more about it, in very simple terms, what is it?
Yeah, it's a weakening of the bone. I mean, think about a pore being a hole, osteo meaning bone, it's weakening of the bone. And so what we're going to go into a little bit later is actually the formation of normal bone. And then why do we weaken bones with age? That's the whole goal to this, to make it really, I don't want to say simple, because obviously bone's very complex, but to understand something that, I mean, more women die of osteoporosis than uterine cancer, breast cancer, and endometrial and cervical cancer combined. It's not something that's benign. And I think there's ways we could understand the metabolical process of bone formation and go, hey, can we do something to slow that down or even eliminate it? And the answer is yes.
So you had mentioned, might have been maybe a week or so ago, about the structure of the bone, which surprised me. You talked more about the bone being, almost flexible and, I'll just use this phrase, more liquid based, although very strong and pliable and what have you. And I think a lot of us have a vision of a bone being this hard, rigid, bone, in fact. So can you kind of walk us through that and just maybe talk a little bit more about how the bone actually operates and the structure?
Yeah, the bone has to be very strong tensile strength, pliable, bendable. It's a very active organ. The bone marrow makes all of our hematopoietic, or so white blood cells, red blood cells, and platelets. It's very active. It has to be strong to have the muscles attached to it for strength, for mobility. It supports the skeletal system, supports the muscle system. So the bone, when you cross-section through it, you have your axial bone, your spine, your hips, your pelvis. You have your long bones, your femurs, and your humerus, your shoulders. These are all important bones. They're active with blood formation, like I said. But the outside of the bone is called cortical. It's the harder part of the bone. And then inside is trabecular. You have like these, picture like a sponge almost. And what's very interesting is there's these cells in the body called osteocytes. That's the precursor. It's after stem cells have changed from what's called a mesoderm cell to the bone cell, the osteocytes. Then they, based upon hormone expression, will become what's called an osteoblast or an osteoclast. Osteoblasts lay down bone. They lay down the cortical bone and the trabecular bone, so the bone is hard, mobile, pliable. Like, think about a young baby. They could break when I used to deliver babies, when a baby got stuck coming through the canal, one of the procedures actually to break the clavicle so that I could actually break with my finger so it would come down to get the baby out. It heals up in a couple days. You break my clavicle, it's taking longer than that. So that's an osteoblast. And to do that, in men, it's testosterone. And in women, it's testosterone and progesterone. Now, osteoclasts break bone down. Greg, why would you break bone down? Very important. Bone is the number one bank account of calcium. Calcium is stored not just to make bone, but it's also a deposit because calcium is used for nerves talking to muscle, for muscles to contract. You need to, there's a protein called calmodulin, has to do with releasing this anion called calcium that allows contraction to occur. So you can't, if you had calcium was floating around, it would actually stick to things. That's why atherosclerosis is an inflammatory process of endothelial damage And when there's inflamed, calcium binds to these free radicals, because picture a free radical. Free radical has extra electrons. Calcium has extra protons, so they will bond those up electronically. So that's why calcium builds up in atherosclerosis. So if you have extra calcium floating around, it's going to cause damage. It's not good. So it's very, very, very important to be micro-controlled. So you have your K2 through 7s for calcium metabolism, as well as your parathyroid calcitonin. So you're making bone, breaking bone. In fact, roughly 25% of our bone skeletal system is remade every single year. All right? So that's why it's important that it's a very active tissue. Now, what happens is, as I said, osteoclasts break bone down. That's controlled mainly by estrogen. And you have testosterone and progesterone, or the osteoblast, which lays the bone down. So think of this. Well, women in menopause, what happens in menopause? Well, not just women, men too, Jim. Over the age of 40, both men and women lose roughly 0.5% of bone per year. In menopause, it speeds up in women to roughly 5% per year. By the age of 70, 70% of women have compressed vertebrae. And the thing about it is, you don't fall down and break your hip. That's just going to happen. But sometimes just the stress of walking, twist your ankle, you snap your femur and fall down. And the problem is, when you break your bone, when you break your hip when you're older, then the rehabilitation is slowed up, and your chance of morbidity increases tremendously as you age. So there's a lot of morbidity to this if you bones break down. And if you look at the literature, 40% of women have osteoporosis as they age, severe osteoporosis, and 25% of men. So this is not just a woman disease. It just speeds up faster because women have a rapid loss of hormones. Men have more of a gradual loss.
So is that why people shrink when they get older?
Exactly. Think about it. 70% of women have, it's called Duwach's, the hump over. That is called Duwach's. That's the compression of the vertebrae, and then the muscles contracting now. Because remember, you talk about bone. Bone's a strong gird, so you want to keep that strong. That breaks down, your muscles are pulling on it, it's going to pull you over. And that's not what you want to happen. But it's very important to understand the data on this, because it's not just a disease of aging, Jim. It's a disease of low hormones, which is a byproduct of aging. As we also know, we've talked many times on these podcasts, that the rate in which we lose our testosterone, estrogen, progesterone is sped up because of the phthalates, the endocrine disruptors in our environment.
So what are some of the early warning signs?
Yeah, that's interesting, is just getting older. That's a warning sign all by itself. And also, but what can you do? This is also important. I've told this as a gynecologist for years. Let's deposit more money in the bank when you're young. That's why doing stressful exercises, taking the proper amount of calcium, magnesium, strontium, vitamin D, which is very important for calcium metabolism. You do that when you're younger. Stress exercise, weight resistance, very important. You put tensile strength on the muscles, so the osteocytes get stimulated to make more bone. So stress is actually good for you when you have the hormone environment under that stress to make more bone. All right? So when you're young, again, weight-bearing exercises, very important. Walking, high-protein diet, high-fat diet, enough calcium, not too much calcium, bond with the other very important minerals. Boron is also another one that's very important. Now, that's what you do. And again, but as you lose age, as you get older, you do lose these hormones. So therefore, what happens, interesting, is the laying down of bone, the osteoblasts, which is estrogen, testosterone, and progesterone, is you're losing that ability, but you're losing the osteoclast activity is increasing faster. That's why that osteoporosis. Your first one, you get osteopenia, which is a thinning of the bone. You get a bone scan of the wrist, the hip, and the femur head. You can look at that over time. But again, why are we waiting for this to occur, Jim? It's because we know we're going to get that. So why not look at it earlier and do these exercises, eat the proper stuff? But the warning sign is going to be shrinkage. Again, it's when you see the warning signs, damage has already occurred.
Yeah, and usually you find out about it when you inadvertently, like you said earlier, fracture something, and that probably leads to testing, and then you find out that you have osteoporosis. Is that a fair assessment?
You may get an early osteopenia, early fracture, say in your 20s or 30s, and you end up finding that you have hyperparathyroidism or hyperthyroidism because there's a higher metabolism rate. So it's like you're going faster because you're metabolizing bone faster, and then so you find this underlying endocrine condition. You can fix the endocrine condition and then help the disease process. So there are outliers out there, but mainly it's the process of aging, and the process of aging incorporates the lack of sex hormones, which is what makes the bone and does bone reabsorption.
Getting back to, you talked about the I guess the hunchback look.
Yeah, it's DUPWAGR, Dupwach's hump.
All right, so if you have someone in their 50s, let's say, that is starting to show that, is that an early warning sign, or could that be something else as well?
The later sign, but that's interesting. They've done studies in women in the Journal of American OBGYN 1979, looked at knowing the process of why bone is made, or how bone is made, can we replace this? So they had oral estrogen, patch estrogen, cream estrogen, and one arm was estrogen pellets plus testosterone. Now, the creams and the patches slowed bone loss, but didn't make more bone. Oral one did that. The cream and patch increased a little, about 0.5% per year. But they found that the estrogen with the testosterone and progesterone, those three, had the highest actually making of more bone, 8.3% bone per year. So it's a 13-fold change, going from losing 5% of bone per year because of aging to 8.3% bone because of, your bone doesn't know its age if the hormones are young. We've had multiple women in our practice that want to get bone scans, and 4 or 5 years later show they have more bone, and their doctor's like amazed. But this study's from 1979, nothing new. But again, let's understand the biochemistry. Bone needs these 3 hormones to work. So why don't you give them regardless of your age and get those benefits so that you don't have to wait for the warning signs? I was listening to a great talk. I was doing CME last week, and I'll use hot flashes. This is a great gynecologist about hot flashes. It ties together here. She says hot flashes are not, they're not just a bothersome thing. They're a biomarker of endothelial dysfunction. Because women that get hot flashes have a 200% increase in heart attacks. Because it's a sign, because what estrogen, besides controlling the thermoregulatory part of the brain, it also helps protect the heart for gives coronary artery dilatation. So it's like, all these multiple signs are pointing. They're like red lights in your car. Warning, 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 right? And that's what's occurring. So hot flashes, think about it, it's equal loss of bone. It's just losing bone. Why wait till you break hip? And the big thing, Jim, is the medication they use to repair it is a bisphosphate, is the most common one, is it makes more cortical bone, which is a hard, firm bone, but more brittle. And people will go on to actually have a higher, 5 years later, a higher femur head breakage and the mandible of the jaw. It's called jaw disease, breaking the mandible of the jaw. It actually shatters because there's more bone. It's thicker and harder on the outside level, but the beams inside are not there. So therefore, what's the best medication? How about no medication? The hormones your body made for its 40 years to use now.
So walk us through in simplistic terms. I know you don't have your whiteboard today. How the proper amount of estrogen allows for bone growth.
Okay, great. Again, the bone growth. You're making bone, more of your bone. When I say we use a woman again, men in our adolescent age, because we have a lot of growth hormone. Growth hormone also stimulates osteoblasts to lay down bone in its other process. So you have growth hormone, testosterone, and progesterone laying down the bone. That's the bone maker. That's the osteoblasts. Now, you lay the bone down, but your body still needs calcium for nerves to talk, for muscle to talk. That's where estrogen kicks in. So estrogen controls how the speed in which the osteoclasts work. It's the regulator on the osteoclast. So a woman who's cycling has enough estrogen to keep her osteoclast in a state where the osteoclast basically is equaling the osteoblast. So what happens is when you lose your production, the osteoblasts decrease, you're making less bone, and then you're also making less estrogen. So the osteoclast activity, which is the active breaking down of bone, is faster than laying it down to when they're all gone. So there's no more bone being made and more bone being dissolved. That's the terminal end of osteoporosis.
So when you're a mature adult, let's say you're finished growing, you're in your 30s, your 40s, are you losing, is the bone always replacing itself?
Yes, roughly 25% per year is redone. Yes, Jim.
But so the bone itself, if you're at, let's say 100% and I'm just going to say 2 inches, and it's not going to go to 3. It's just that 2 is going to continue to be recycled where the 2 stays strong.
100%. But then in the environment where we're losing the hormone that lays down the bone, i.e. the women in estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone, then you can start losing the bone. That's why you have osteopenia. And that's interesting too. In women who use birth control, the progesterone, the synthetic progesterone dominated ones, the Mirena IUDs, the mini pills, they block the actual production, what the progesterone does to the bone, and they get osteopenia because, again, progesterone in women, along with testosterone, is what lays bone down. When you take a synthetic one, it does not do that job. It doesn't do it doesn't mimic natural progesterone fully, but it blocks the receptor site, but does not make more bone. That's why they have osteopenia. And then after they're off the IUD or off the mini pill, which is progesterone only, then they increase their production again because natural progesterone is being made when they ovulate.
So where do muscles play into this whole thing?
Oh, muscle. See, this is it. Muscle puts the tensile strength on the bone. So when a bone is under stress, i.e. lifting weights, then the bone gets the osteoblasts get registered now to use growth hormone and testosterone and progesterone to make more bone. That's why men and women who are sick, right? And they're, say, in a coma, we'll say, and they're laid in bed for 3 months. Their muscles ain't working. So therefore not putting stress on the muscles, they actually lose bone, they become osteopenic. They become sarcopenic. The muscles themselves shrink. So they all ties together. They've shown, anti-gravity. Astronauts actually lose bone mass and sarcopenia when they're off Earth's gravity as well. So the stress is really, really good for the body because that initiates its processes to make muscle and to make bone.
The lower the testosterone levels, the more difficult it is to generate muscle mass.
That's the thing, Jimmy. Think about it again. The range, I know we repeat this all the time, but this is what I really want people to beat in our head. I wish we called losing hormones a disease. We wait to the final symptoms of them. Like, I'll give an example for women. Hormone replacement therapy is approved for symptoms of hot flashes of vaginal dryness. That's it. But those are the red lights. What about the other tissues, such as brain, heart, bone, muscle, breast tissue, that are being deteriorated because of lack of hormones? It's the red light going off and you're only fixing the bulb and the light. You're not fixing all the other problems. I think it's a warning sign for that. That's why it's important to understand that now we have our range of hormones. We'll use testosterone as an example. The hormone that lays bone down 40, 50 years ago, a range for a male was roughly 800 to 1300. Today, the range of a male is roughly 200 to around 900. How much less bone are we making in our bone production era? You know what I mean? We have less reserve we're starting. A woman, when I was in school, the upper limits of normal was considered around 200. Now the upper limits of normal, depends on the range, is roughly 40 to 60. So how much less are we making? So when they have their complete fall off, how much more? Again, the literature shows when you think about it, at the age of 40, men and women are losing 0.5% of bone per year. And it appears that that's when when women age, progesterone, that part of the cycle, usually ages first over the estrogen part. So therefore, we're losing the laying down part of the bone. So it just makes common sense is how our body makes bone. Let's continue that for our 90 years of our life. There's no downside for that. But the medications they use once a disease occurs, yes, it does help a little bit. But again, there's consequences equivalent to having brittle bone. You want strong, pliable bone that could move and bend and take the tensile strength.
So speaking of medications, what are other medications that you could be taking that are leading to osteoporosis, but you don't even know it?
Yeah, well, the big one is being overtreated for thyroid disease could be one. To have an upper limb, higher parathyroid, which has to do with a hormone called calcitonin. But there are medicines that will actually weaken the production of hormones. Again, we talked about before, Jim. Mini pill, birth control pills, anything with a synthetic progesterone. Those are the big ones. There are some other multiple class ones that affect calcium as well, but those are the big ones, Jim, the synthetic hormones.
All right, so that's like Premarin and Prempro.
Yeah, it's the progesterone part. Yeah, so the big one is methoxyprogesterone, MPA. That's the big one, and levonorgestrel, which is in the IUD.
Now, on the flip side, though, aren't there some beneficial effects if you're taking estrogen and progesterone together?
100%. And that there's been papers showing what's the best way to make bone, particularly bone. Estrogen slows down loss, but estrogen plus testosterone plus progesterone makes more bone. So besides slowing down loss, you actually make more bone. And that's the paper that we actually put on a new book, the 8.3% study from 1979. So that's just the bone part, Jim. We didn't talk about making more muscle. Sarcopenia, number 4 cause of death over the age of 65, Jim, get this, is falling down. And when you look at TBI, brain trauma, that's one of the leading causes of death around the world by falling down, and obviously trauma from other accidents. But mobility is crucial. When you get older, you lose your proprioception, you lose your balance. That's why it's very important as you age to not just train muscle to be strong, but to train your nerves to speak to muscles so they control them better. That's why working out on boosted balls, looking at controlling your toes, there's a great one showing taking a golf ball, rub it on your foot for 10 seconds a day helps the nerves actually regenerate. So all these things happen because, again, the body needs stress to be good. Exercise is good. That's the bottom line. Exercise is good because I believe sarcopenia, osteopenia, the weakening are the typical aging body. Again, we can't make it zero, but I believe we could delay that graph out where that hits out in the 80s and 90s, not in the 40s. I see the data there.
You talked a lot about testosterone helping, but does that then vary if you're doing the patches or the creams or the shots compared to the pellets?
Yes. It has to do with the blood levels and availability.
So why don't you walk us through that? Okay.
So a patch is a good way to go. Bypass the liver. Or let's go oral first. The problem with the oral is it goes to the liver, and the liver has to call the first liver pass. So what happens is the first pass effect. You lose virtually 99% of whatever chemical you take because it's broken down. Certain chemicals, like I'll use a certain hormone called progesterone, actually when you take it to the liver, it's actually beneficial because the liver breaks it down a thing called 5-allopregnanolol, which protects the brain. But the bottom line is you want to mimic the way our ovaries and testicles make these hormones. And the way the hormones do them, they make them in the organ itself, say the testicle, that secretes in the bloodstream. Then the bloodstream goes in the bloodstream, it's the highway, and the cells that want to grab it, which is all the cells. That's how it goes. It's not like a nerve where a nerve connects from the spinal cord to the muscle. It's not a direct connection. It's in the environment. So you want to mimic that. A patch, bypass the liver, which is great. Cream is the same thing. But 40% of men in testosterone studies show they do not absorb at all from the cream at all via the skin. So there's more of a variability of the absorption rate. The injection bypasses the skin, goes to the muscle, bypasses the liver, but the problem is a big, large depot within the muscle. So the half-life has to do with how long the length of the molecule is. So you have a 3.5 day to about a 7-day half-life. One of them, propionate, is actually 24 hours. So the pellet sits under the skin and releases in male a 200 milligram pellet, 1.3 milligrams per day, a steady state, just like the testicle makes. So that's why I believe it's the best route because it mimics our testicle the best or the ovary the best.
Okay, so the bioidentical compared to synthetic in this case doesn't have there's any benefits. Obviously, there's a lot of benefits to bioidentical, but from a bone perspective, are there any benefits?
The synthetic is, I think, for bone formation, like the shot will say per se, they're all beneficial. It's just the thing about it is there are side effects with synthetics. There are 3 classes of testosterones. The class 1 is the ester, class 2 is 19-nortestosterone, class 3 is 17-alkylation. All 3 are great. The 17-alkylation, those affects the liver. The other 2 are shots, and the problem with them, they can slightly increase blood pressure, they can slightly increase blood clot risk, very small risk, but they can. And the big one is studies have shown, they got this great book out of Belgium that shows that it actually it's called, when a cell dies off, it's called apoptosis. And apoptosis is at a higher rate with synthetics. Bioidentical actually makes more brain grow, just the opposite. And bioidentical has no increase in blood pressure, no increase in blood clots, because it's the actual structure our body makes. But I'll be very clear. You talk about osteoporosis, all three of those help make bone and muscle grow, and they're beneficial. Yes, Jim. Even synthetics, I have no problem with those at all for that.
Earlier you brought up supplements, but we really didn't go into any significant detail. And it looks like vitamin D plays a pretty big role, again, like it does in pretty much everything. So walk us through the why D and how it provides for absorption of calcium and bone mineralization and so on and so forth.
Yeah, vitamin D, when you take it, the liver converts it to what's called D3-1, and then the kidney converts it to D3-125. That's the classical D3. You got to take it with vitamin K2 to 7, because vitamin K1, that vitamin becomes part of our clotting mechanism. K2 through 7 actually helps our calcium metabolism. So you take D3 with K because you want to absorb. What happens is that when it gets D3 to the kidney, that actually in your gut, it actually helps absorb calcium from the GI tract and keeps you from losing it when you urinate. So it's very, very important. That's your limitation of your calcium. And vitamin D is also an anabolic steroid like testosterone. There's actually areas on the bone that helps to stimulate and grow. So it has it's a growth factor as well as a calcium metabolizer. But sun rays, UVB rays, actually is what converts it in the skin prior to the kidney. And that's why it's crucially important when you use sunblock, you want a sunblock that blocks UVA rays, not UVB rays. So, and then you need the actual the minerals to bond, the calcium, the magnesium, the phosphorus, the boron. So you're making a rock, right? You're making a very light, like you said, a fluid rock. So you need these minerals for that. But they're all laid down on this bone matrix. And when you have old cells, called apoptosis again in bone, it's not healthy to keep those around. When you have bones that are old, and they're not eaten up by the immune system, what happens is they release these things called cytokines. And what happens then, if they're around joints, lead to arthritis. These anything itis is an inflammation. So if you leave an old cell around, be it in the brain or what's on the bone right now, it's not healthy for the body because an old cell makes the environment very inflammatory reactions. So that's the job of our immune system, is to float around, besides killing cancer cells and bacteria and fungi, things like that. Its main job is to go around get rid of the old cells, because old cells, they're called sensus cells, they're sitting there and not doing anything, but they are doing something. They're not doing their job. They're becoming inflammatory processes. So that's part of the reabsorption of the 25% of new bone made every year.
So you mentioned boron a few times now. Where do you get that?
You can buy that in a supplement. It's in meat. It's in eggs. The thing, Jim, in the old days, I'm not a specialist on this, but the studies I've read, the topsoil was different. We had more minerals and selenium and iodine and things in our topsoil. And with the mass production of, crops are great. We got to eat, right? We have to eat. There's been a loss of topsoil. And there's a lot of papers on that. So that's why rotating crops are crucially important. The right manures, those kind of things. I wish I knew more about that. Technically, I don't. But the bottom line is, what's in the soil, right? What's in the soil leads to what's in the food, and the food's what we eat. You get a free-range egg, look at the color of that yolk versus one at the store-bought, completely different. So it's very important we know what the source we're eating is eating. And the plants, it's eating the soil.
A lot of complicated things just to make sure you have strong bones.
Yeah, but it is, but it's what's amazing, Jim, is we don't think about this, right? We eat the food, we do the protein, and this body does it. I mean, what I believe, it's amazing how he does it all. Because everything we talk about bone or whatever, I like this phrase, nothing is in isolation. It's all working, the brain, the muscle, the heart, the endocrine system. It's all working at the same time with this beautiful surveillance system, the immune system. Look around, make sure the bad things are growing. It's insane, the complexity of it. But we break things down to little, like how osteoclasts make or osteoblasts make. That's one minutia of all of this. So when I'm talking like this, expert. It's just we're looking at how it works, but so many things complicate this. Our food, how Roundup, which is sprayed on our grains, how that affects the food of the actual grain of our chickens are eating or our beef are eating. There's so much complex things in this. I was reading an article, Jim. I think there was over 90,000 new chemicals been exposed in our diet the last 7 years that have not been tested because certain things that are fragrances or things like that are not tested. And you're like, well, the guinea pig is you and me in the mirror. So I think it's really important we eat as old-fashioned as possible, out of good soil, grass-fed, free-ranged, wild game, things like that it's been proven for centuries to be beneficial. So I think that's it. And I understand the volume of crops need to be made, but there's ways to do it. I'm no pro at it, but I know Europe does it different than we do, and they have less leaky gut syndrome, things like that. But the bone stuff is mind-boggling because cartilages, we didn't talk about cartilage in the womb. So you got this bone that starts as cartilage, which is very pliable, like your nose stays cartilage. And then those are called chondrocytes. A shark has no bone. A shark is all chondrocyte, right? It's all bone. It's all cartilage. So just things like we have them in ears, our noses, and so certain of those areas turn into bone. Some stay cartilage. It's just amazing the fascination to me and how this stuff is all done like this beautiful symphony without missing a beat. The problem is we throw different things in that ruin the beat, and the environment does, and that's the problem. So, but I think to me, I love focusing on osteoporosis because I love looking at that as a disease. Not the osteoporosis as a disease. Aging is a disease. So if we looked at aging as a disease and we can nip it in the bud, why would we not nip it in the bud? Why do we wait till we fall down? Why do we wait till we have compressed vertebrae? Let's not wait to that point and not use inferior medications. Yes, they make bone. Yes, they're better than nothing. But if we can cut it off in the past, as a surgeon, I think what I try to do is anticipate problems so that nobody knows that you avoid the problems. You turn left instead of turning right when you're supposed to turn. If you turn right, there's an issue. But that comes with, experience in the, operating and stuff like that. But in anything we do, it's part of getting older, right? We make decisions. So I'm trying to think, how can we make the bone keep making bone that's young? And I really believe that bioidentical hormone therapy is that answer, Jim.
Well, as always, very informative. Give me some takeaways. Haven't asked you those in a while. So do you have 5 of them? 5.
Okay. Exercise. Crucial for this. Again, we need stress. Again, understand what doesn't kill you makes you stronger is real, Jim. It really is real. Understand that. Get really nerdy. Deep sauna and ice cold baths. They really they stimulate the immune system. They stimulate getting rid of cytokines. They clean up the lymphatic systems. These are things we could do on ourselves. And then, but simple things. I understand when I say working out, but I don't have time for this. Walking it's more important than anything else other than sleep. We don't talk about sleep, but walking. So do the things our body does, and then give the nutrients, the body what it needs. The high protein, the high fat, the proper carbohydrates, what it needs so that the machinery can keep working. That's what I wanted people to do. I really want people educated, Jim, to understand that. Yeah, we had the podcast yesterday with a doctor, and we were talking about all liberty and freedom stuff because I really believe there's nothing better than being free. But that freedom takes responsibility. So ask for wise counsel. There's books out there. There's infographics. There's the internet has. You have Dr. Fung. You have Sean Baker. You got all these guys out there. You got a great book for women called Fast Like a Girl. It's volume of information out there. Don't be afraid to go look, and then get wise counsel around yourself and ask these questions, Jim. But I think bottom line is one thing: stress is good. It doesn't kill you, makes you better.
Yeah, unfortunately, I just think that people don't pay much attention to what they're eating because they're being marketed and told that it's actually good for them when in reality it's not in a lot of cases. So,
well, remember we talked about yesterday's podcast, there's actually certain addictive amphetamines stuck in our food that aren't in other countries. We got to understand that sugar itself, if you eat fat, animal fat, or some good healthy plant fat like avocados and olives, there's a part in your brain called the satiety receptor site. That brain part gets satisfied. It says, I'm full. You eat protein, same thing happens. The sugar molecule, the glucose molecule, actually stimulates the morphine receptor in our brain. The morphine receptor is happy for that one instance and wants more. So like it's just not, there's not one single disease process of not enough sugar. It's just the opposite. That inflammatory reaction is the key to all diseases, and therefore we have to eliminate the cause of that, and that is sugar.
Well, we've talked about that topic before, and I'm sure we'll talk about it again. As always, very informative. Thank you, Doctor.
My pleasure. Thank you very much. I truly appreciate it.
This has been a production of Optimal Bio. Optimal Bio is CEO Tyler Brannon, podcast host and partner Jim Baker, Medical Director Greg Brannon, production assistance by Core Media, Beth Grabencourt, Administrator, Kevin Duthu, Executive Producer. The podcast can be found on our website, optimalbio.com, on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Our theme song is Sunwave by Paradiso, provided by Epidemic Sound.